What happens to a massive retail complex when it's built for thousands, but remains eternally empty? Security guards report psychological decay after only hours inside these airless concrete labyrinths, where exit signs lead to nowhere. We are stripping away the comfort of the familiar to reveal the terrifying reality of those locked inside the sterile halls of a mall that time forgotten for other places that were never meant to be. These stories come from real-sounding accounts, whispered in fear by people who stumbled into architectural ghosts and barely made it out with their sanity. Marcus Thibodeau, a 34-year-old overnight security guard from Akron, Ohio, took the job because it paid $22 an hour to do basically nothing. Just walk the silent corridors of the Galleria Azure. It's a massive 3-story shopping center that had been fully finished in 2008, but never opened to the public after the developer filed for bankruptcy and vanished. The place was frozen in a permanent state of almost, with storefronts still wrapped in protective plastic. Escalators that hummed with phantom electricity nobody could fully shut off. In a food court where the chairs sat upside down on the tables like a giant game of musical chairs that never got to begin. His supervisor, a tired old guy named Rick, told him the usual stories. Sometimes the motion sensors go off on their own. It's just the building settling. Don't let it mess with your head. So Marcus nodded and did his rounds with a heavy mag light and a thermos full of gas station coffee. The first 3 nights were boring in the way that felt like time was molasses. But on the 4th night, around 2:15 a.m., he heard a muffled, warbling version of a familiar pop song from 10 years ago, playing through the mall's intercom system, a system that Rick had sworn wasn't even wired to a power source yet. The speakers just decorative holes in the ceiling. Marcus froze mid-step on the polished terrazzo floor. Sound so distorted it was like the music was trying to climb out of a wet paper bag. The lyrics stretching and contracting in ways that made the back of his neck prickle. So he pulled out his phone and started recording, holding it up toward the vaulted atrium where dead potted palms stood like brown skeletons. On the recording, you can hear him whisper, "You getting this?" to nobody, and then the jingle abruptly cut out and was replaced by a female voice, perfectly calm, announcing a flash sale in a store that didn't exist. Attention shoppers. Visit the Violet Room on level 2 for 40% off all mirrors. And there was no Violet Room. There never had been. The directory board near the main entrance was a blank backlit panel with no lettering. He felt a cold trickle of sweat slide down his ribcage and decided to investigate. Climbing the frozen escalator to the 2nd floor, where the security lights cast a sickly yellow glow that made everything like a faded photograph, and that's when he experienced what he later called peripheral bleeding. A term he stumbled on in an online forum, but couldn't get out of his head. From the corner of his left eye, he could clearly see movement in the empty food court below. Dozens of figures shifting and lining up at the shuttered pretzel stand. But the instant he turned to look directly, they vanished, leaving only the upside-down chairs. He spun back, heart slamming, and saw them again in the corner of his right eye, even more distinct now. Silhouettes of shoppers milling about. A stroller. Someone raising a hand to point at a storefront that didn't exist. All of it, there in his peripheral vision, like a memory burned onto the retina of the building itself. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly the phone dropped and clattered on the floor. And when he bent down to pick it up, he noticed something worse. The floor plan had shifted. Because instead of the long corridor to the North Anchor store, he now saw a T-junction that definitely hadn't been there before. A branching hallway that led into absolute darkness backed away. Whispering to himself, "Nope, nope." Nope. And tried to retrace his steps back to the security office near the loading docks. But every turn he took opened onto a fresh impossibility, a row of mannequins inside a sealed boutique that were all facing the glass. Their featureless heads tilted at a listening angle, a water fountain burbling water that was black under the lights. A children's play area where the rubber floor tiles were arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed to draw his vision inward. The worst was the intercom coming back to life, now playing a loop of that same distorted jingle, but slowed down so severely it sounded like a gigantic creature groaning in its sleep, and beneath it he heard what seemed like 100 tiny voices trying to sing along, out of tune and desperate. Marcus started running, his boots slapping the floor so loud they echoed back in triplicate. And after what felt like hours, he saw the red glow of an exit sign above a set of double doors. But when he slammed through them, he was back in the main atrium. Directly underneath the great central skylight where the moon cast a square of pale light onto the grimy floor. And standing just at the edge of that light was a shadow that didn't match any object. A tall, thin smudge that leaned slightly forward as if waiting. He felt the air squeeze out of his lungs, his vision tunneling, and then the shadow dissolved like smoke, and the mall was absolutely silent again. So still, he could hear the blood roaring in his ears. Marcus quit the next day, telling Rick only that the place was bent, and to this day he cannot enter a shopping mall without feeling something pressing at the edges of his sight. A crowd that disappears the moment you try to greet it. Emily Voss, a 27-year-old pharmaceutical sales rep from Raleigh, North Carolina, was flying back from a conference in Chicago when a series of delays pushed her connecting flight so late that the airline gave her a voucher for a red-eye out of a concourse she'd never heard of. Gate 34C in Terminal D, section that according to the departure board was temporarily relocated for renovations. She followed the signs. Past a set of plastic sheeting and down a freshly carpeted hallway that smelled like drywall dust and new paint. The overhead lights buzzing slightly in a way that felt too loud for 11 p.m. She noticed right away that there were no other passengers, no gate agents, not even the ambient hum of a janitor's floor buffer. Just her own rolling suitcase clicking over the tile joints like a metronome. The gate turned out to be a small waiting area with a single desk and a monitor displaying a flight to a destination she didn't recognize. 3 letters that spelled NRX, and beneath that, an estimated departure time that simply read soon. She sat down, pulled out her phone to text her boyfriend, but the message bounced back with an error. And when she looked at the screen, the time was frozen at 11:11, and the signal bars had disappeared. That's when she heard the boarding announcement, a hollow recorded voice that said, "Now boarding flight 0, non-stop service to nowhere, all rows." All passengers, and the jet bridge door swung open on its own with a pneumatic hiss. Showing a tunnel that looked a little too long, the walls curved in a way that made her think of the inside of a throat. Emily should have run, but a strange, heavy calm settled over her. The kind of logic that only works in dreams where you accept the impossible, because the alternative, turning around and finding the hallway gone, was worse. So she grabbed her carry-on and walked down the jet bridge, the floor sloping gently downward, the air growing cooler and carrying a faint smell of ozone and old coffee. She emerged not into an airplane, but into another terminal. Identical to the first, except the windows were blacked out with some kind of dark film, and a row of departure screens above her listed flights to cities like Carcosa, Tirana, Nog, and home, all with departure times that read late. A few scattered people, sat in the hard plastic chairs, their faces turned away, their stillness so absolute she couldn't tell if they were breathing. And when she approached a woman in a business suit to ask for directions, the woman's head swiveled toward her with a motion that was just a little too smooth, and her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she said, "First time in the interstitial, sweetheart. Don't worry, you'll learn the rhythm soon." Emily backed away, pulse hammering, and began speed walking down the concourse looking for an exit, any exit. But every gate she passed showed the same impossible destinations, the same empty jet bridges, and the carpet pattern under her feet started to repeat like a looping texture in a video game. A sequence of blue and gray diamonds that eventually made her dizzy. She tried doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," but they opened onto tight hallways that curved back to the terminal. And the only moving thing besides her was a small cleaning cart that trundled along by itself, its mop handle swaying as if guided by an invisible hand. She finally collapsed onto a bench near a shuttered newsstand, and when she looked down at her phone, she saw it was still 11:11. But her reflection in the black screen showed a face that looked older, tireder, her hair slightly mussed in a way it hadn't been before. And that's when she realized she had no idea how long she'd been walking. Time was a syrup here, thick and sweet and suffocating, and the PA system kept cycling through the same boarding call in different languages, none of which she understood. Until at last, she heard her own name, Emily Voss. "Please proceed to gate 34C for immediate departure," and she broke into a sprint toward the gate, sobbing with relief. And when she burst back through the plastic sheeting into the normal terminal, the sun was rising and her phone said Tuesday, though she had boarded on a Sunday night. She never spoke of it to anyone, but sometimes when she's waiting for a flight, she catches a whiff of ozone and feels the pull of a tunnel just behind the gate, and she grips her armrest and does not move. Jake Pereira, a 29-year-old real estate photographer from Boise, Idaho, got a weird gig off a Craigslist ad. Shoot the interiors of an entire subdivision of model homes that had been built during the housing boom. Fully furnished, but never sold, sitting out in the high desert like a ghost neighborhood with perfectly manicured lawns maintained by a sprinkler system that ran on a timer nobody set. The developer had gone under. The bank owned the lots, but someone wanted a visual catalog for a potential foreign buyer. So Jake drove his silver sedan up a long curving road and parked in front of a cul-de-sac ringed with 6 identical craftsman-style houses, each one painted a different muted earth tone, but otherwise the same. Porch light glowing yellow. Front door slightly ajar, the smell of fresh paint and new carpet wafting out. He started with the sagebrush model, snapping the granite countertops, the stainless steel fridge still humming with electricity from a generator somewhere. The fake family photos on the mantle of people who didn't exist, smiling frozenly. The work was easy but unsettling in a low-grade hum, the way the rooms were too perfectly arranged. A book left open on a coffee table to a random page about migratory birds. A child's jacket draped over a chair, though no child had ever run through these halls. After 3 houses, he realized he'd lost track of his position, because every time he stepped out onto the porch, the street looked slightly different. The sky a deeper shade of blue, the sun hanging in the exact same spot as if it had stopped moving, and his car was no longer parked where he swore he'd left it. He shrugged it off as exhaustion, drank some water, and entered the Juniper model, only to find that it shared the exact same layout, but the family photos had changed. The smiling couple now looked distressed. Their mouths opened slightly, their eyes turned to the camera as if pleading. And the child's jacket on the chair was now a small pair of sneakers placed neatly next to an open basement door he was certain had been locked before. Jake's professional instinct warred with his survival instinct, and survival lost. He descended the basement stairs, camera raised, a flash illuminating a finished rec room with a big screen TV, looping a silent video of a birthday party where the children's faces were blurred, the audio a low static pop. At the far end of the basement there was another door, white and unremarkable. And when he opened it, he stepped into the kitchen of another model home, but it was the sagebrush again. It's the same book on the table, the same open page. Only now the fridge door was standing open, and a carton of milk was spilled on the floor. The milk not yet dried, and his footprints led from the front entry to the kitchen and stopped. He bolted out the front door and found himself in a different cul-de-sac, an exact copy of the first one. The same 6 houses in the same colors, his car nowhere. The sky now a flat, even gray like a studio backdrop. Jake tried calling 911, but got only a dial tone that sounded reversed, a stuttering beep. And when he ran down the street to the next block, it was another cul-de-sac. And the next, a recursion of porches and fake shutters and sprinklers that clicked on even though no grass was alive. The water creating rainbows in the artificial light that moved wrong, the refraction splitting into shapes that looked like hands. The terror peaked when he saw a figure standing in the bay window of the canyon model, a mannequin dressed in clothes identical to his own, holding a camera, its head slowly turning to track him as he passed. And he screamed and ran until his lungs burned, and he collapsed in the middle of an intersection where the street signs had words that weren't in any language. He woke up in his car, engine running, parked at a gas station 20 miles away with no memory of driving, the camera's memory card full of photos he never took. Images of basements that led to other basements. A final frame that shows his own face staring into the lens from inside a window of a house he cannot find on any map. Delilah Cross, a 31-year-old urban explorer from Portland, Oregon, had broken into plenty of condemned buildings. But the abandoned subway station beneath the city's oldest industrial district was supposed to be the crown jewel. A fully constructed platform and tunnel system that the transit authority sealed off in the 1970s before a single train ever ran, due to budget cuts and structural anomalies that were never explained in the public records. She rappelled down a maintenance shaft with her friend Kirk, their headlamps slicing the thick blackness. And they landed on a platform so pristine it looked like a movie set. White tile walls gleaming, a row of wooden benches, an old analog clock frozen at 4:04, and a vending machine still stocked with dusty cans of Tab. Kirk laughed nervously and said it felt like they'd stepped into a bubble of time, and Delilah agreed. Until her headlamp caught a flicker at the tunnel's mouth and she heard a sound that didn't belong, the distant, rhythmic clatter of steel wheels on a track, a train approaching. But that was impossible because the rails were welded shut at the surface years ago. A warm wind pushed out of the tunnel, smelling of ozone and wet wool. And then headlights bloomed in the dark, 2 round white eyes growing brighter. And a silver train glided into the station with a whisper of brakes. Doors sliding open to reveal a warmly lit carriage completely empty except for ads above the seats ads. For products that didn't exist. A soda called Gleam, a movie titled The Last Tuesday, and an airline promising flights to a city she'd never heard of. Kirk grabbed her arm and said, "We need to go. Right now." But his voice had a dreamy quality, and she couldn't seem to move her legs, her body drawn forward by a sweet, sleepy curiosity until she stepped through the doors and they shushed shut behind her. the train jerking into motion and plunging into the tunnel before she even registered that Kirk was still on the platform, his mouth opening in a silent yell as the station lights blinked out. The train accelerated through darkness that wasn't just an absence of light, but a thick, tactile thing that pressed against the windows like black felt, and the PA system crackled to life with a conductor's voice that sounded like it was coming from a very old recording, announcing stops with names like Ferryman's Crossing, Memory Lane, and the Factory of Regrets. Delilah was sick with fear, but also weirdly calm, the way you feel in a nightmare when you know it's a dream but can't wake up. And she watched the digital display above the door count down to the next stop. The letters resolving into your street, and when the doors opened, she stepped out into a perfect reproduction of the suburban block where she grew up, except the houses were all facades. 2D cutouts propped up by scaffolding, the sky a painted ceiling with clouds that didn't move. The thing that broke her was the figure of a woman standing on the porch of her childhood home, wearing her mother's favorite yellow dress, but when the woman turned, it had no face, just smooth skin where the features should be, and it raised a hand in a wave that was both welcoming and mechanical, the arm moving with the sound of a rubber joint squeaking. She fled back onto the train, sobbing, and the train moved again. The conductor's voice now a low chuckle, and she lost all sense of time until the doors opened onto a different platform, one she recognized as the downtown transit hub. Except it was empty, and the station clock read 4:04. Delilah staggered up to the street, the sun rising on a Wednesday when she'd gone down on a Monday, and she never found Kirk, whose face appeared on missing person posters for 6 months before the case went cold. But sometimes, when she stands near a subway grate, she hears the distant chime of a train bell and feels a pull so strong she has to lock her knees to resist it. Thomas Spinoza, a 22-year-old history major at a small private college in Vermont, was doing a thesis on decommissioned campus architecture when he discovered a locked steel door in the sub-basement of the old library. Behind a pile of discarded card catalogs, a door that according to the building plans didn't exist because the planned expansion in 1963 was never approved, its blueprints scrapped after the architect had a nervous breakdown, and was institutionalized for insisting the building was hungry. Tom, fueled by a mix of academic obsession and Red Bull, picked the lock with a tension wrench and a rake he'd bought online, and the door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a vast, dimly lit library that stretched so far he couldn't see the end. Rows of dark oak shelves that reached 20 feet high, filled with leather-bound books that had no titles on their spines, only numbers that glowed faintly gold when his flashlight passed over them. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of old paper and something mineral, wet stone, and the ceiling was so high it dissolved into shadow, giving the impression of standing inside a cathedral built for a forgotten god. Tom wandered deeper, pulling down books at random, finding them filled with dense, handwritten text in a script that seemed to shift and wriggle when he looked at it directly, the words arranging themselves into sentences he could almost understand, fragments of his own inner monologue. Fears he'd never said aloud, a detailed account of a fight he had with his father in 8th grade that no one else could know. And his hand started trembling so violently he dropped the book, which landed open to a page that had his full name printed at the top, followed by today's date and a single line. He will read this and know that the library has been waiting. He told himself to leave. But the shelves behind him had silently reconfigured, creating a new corridor that led deeper. And at the end of it stood a woman in an old-fashioned librarian's dress. Her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her smile warm but slightly off like a wax figure's, and she spoke in a voice that seemed to come from the books themselves. A chorus of whispery rustling that formed words. "You have an overdue item, Tom. It's the life you've been avoiding. Please, stay and settle your account." He turned and ran, the rows sliding past him like a zoetrope. The numbers on the spines pulsing in sequences that counted down to 0. And when he finally burst through a door, he emerged not in the sub-basement, but on the 3rd floor of the library during broad daylight. Students looking up in alarm as he collapsed, covered in dust and babbling about a floor that doesn't exist. Campus security searched the sub-basement and found only the blank steel wall. No door, no hinges. But in his pocket, Tom found a scrap of paper with his handwriting. A list of overdue books he'd never checked out, all titled with dates that haven't happened yet. He dropped out a month later and moved back home, but every night he dreams of the librarian walking the stacks, patiently sliding a bookmark into the last chapter of his life, waiting for him to return and read the ending.